Good afternoon, everybody. It's Michael Kennedy here from the Switalski's Mental Health and Culture Protection team. Thank you very much, everybody, for registering for this, the last in our series of webinars on the Mental Capacity Act in 2021. We will be producing more webinars in the future, and so if you want to be updated on those, you can sign up to our mailing list, which is on the website. Also, just to reassure everybody, the presentation today and all the previous presentations in the series are on our website, and this one will be added as well. So you don't need to worry about taking notes, you don't need to worry about asking for the slides. The whole presentation will be recorded and you can access it through the website. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the final speaker in the series, and that is Dr. Nicholas Todd. Dr. Todd is a consultant clinical psychologist, and he's going to be speaking about emotional dysregulation, risky behaviours, and mental capacity. So over to you, Dr. Todd.
Thank you very much, Michael. Okay, hello everyone. It's a little bit strange not seeing any of you, but I have been informed that there's quite a lot of you in attendance, so thank you very much for coming this afternoon. So I'm going to be talking about emotional dysregulation, risky behaviour and issues to do with mental capacity. So the outline of the presentation, the first thing I'm going to be talking about is the pathways to developing complex emotional needs, i.e. difficulties regulating emotions and needing to use survival strategies, including risky ones. Okay. We're also going to consider the diagnosis of personality disorder, which some of these people may attract, and the usefulness of that concept in understanding these people, and consider the emotional impact of working with these people and the common personal and organisational responses. And then the final section of the presentation will be looking at some of the issues that I've come across in my practice of assessing mental capacity within these people. Okay. So I just thought I'd start with a bit of a case example. So I'm sure this kind of case will be very familiar for people. So P has a long history of childhood adversity and has grown up in care. She self-harms by cutting herself when she's distressed. P lives in sheltered accommodation with support workers coming in every day to help her. P has come to the attention of social services because she keeps inviting people into her house who pose a risk to her. She's been financially exploited, physically and emotionally abused, and her tenancy has been put at risk. And she's recently been preventing her support workers from coming into the house. So I'm sure many of you will have worked with people like that, and that's the kind of situation where capacity might become a question. Okay, so as we move through this presentation, I'll keep moving back to this case, but just to go back a step, I'm going to now talk about emotional dysregulation as a concept, how people end up with this sort of difficulty. So one of the pathways to developing problems with emotions, difficulties with regulating emotions, is through childhood adversity. So emotional abuse, sexual, physical abuse, witnessing violence in the home, bullying, and then everyday adversity such as poverty and things like that. Those things can then impact on the quality of attachment relationships, and the person can develop negative views about themselves, which then can lead to them having difficulties regulating their emotions and needing to use survival strategies, including risky ones, to manage their emotions day to day. So now I'm just going to pull apart this diagram a bit by talking about each different parts of this. So if we just focus initially on attachments, so I'm sure some of you will be aware of this thing called attachment theory. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what attachment theory is. So if we look at the left-hand side of the slide here, this is what all children need. They need a secure base. They need safety, stability, nurturance, acceptance. They need some autonomy to develop their own identity and competence. They need play, spontaneity, realistic limits, and self-control. Okay, so that's what all children need. But unfortunately, not all children get this. So if you do get this and you have an attuned parent, they're able to be your safe base. So you can go and explore the world as a child, get into trouble, come back to your parent, get some reassurance, and the cycle continues. So you slowly develop your identity and you learn about the world in a safe way. And your parents help you do that through this cycle repeating over and over again. But if your parent isn't very available, isn't very attuned to your needs, there are two ways that you might then cope as a child. You may still explore the world, but you might become very self-sufficient, very avoidant of others, and think that you can manage everything yourself, and you don't need any assistance from adults, and you can be very fearless. You can put yourself at a lot of risk. So I'm sure lots of people have seen children that present like this. And on the other side, we've got some people where their parents are unavailable. They may seek lots and lots of reassurance from any adult that they come into contact with, so they can come across as fearful, clingy, ambivalent. Okay. Again, I'm sure you've seen some people like this, and these ways of coping as a child can continue into adulthood. Okay. And then we've got another way that parents can behave and you can cope. If a parent is chaotic, unpredictable, and unsafe, you may then start as a child to try and charm people, control people, provoke people, manipulate people. So you may learn 3 unhelpful strategies to get your needs met. One being very, very clingy, one being very, very self-sufficient, and one being very, in inverted commas, manipulative. So you might learn that you need to do certain things to get people to do what you need them to do for you. Okay, so that's just a whistle-stop tour through the entire attachment theory, but the idea is that if you don't have a secure attachment as a child, it can cause to lots of problems in your adult relationships. Okay. So here's some examples of how that might translate into some relational patterns. So if you have a very loving parent, you may learn about love and feel loved. A very caring parent, you learn to be cared for. This is a very healthy dynamic, and then you learn to care for other people and love other people. If you've had experiences of being rejected, you learn to reject others in order to get your needs met, because you don't know how to do this or this. And if you've been controlled, you may find it very difficult to know how to manage in the world without controlling other people. Okay, so you might learn some very unhelpful ways of relating to the world. So instead of, there's many different types of these, I've just chosen some really basic, common ones. If you don't have this sort of relational dynamic, you may develop these sorts of relational dynamics. Okay. So there are all sorts of things that people may feel who've had childhood adversity. This is just a list of all the different feelings that people might be going through who've had childhood adversity. As you can see, this list makes quite upsetting reading. Lots and lots of very negative emotions. So people obviously internalize these to themselves and believe that they are these things. And it can be very hard for people to move on from this. So because of those problems with attachments and your sense of self, you then may struggle to regulate your emotions. And one of the reasons for that is a theory called stress vulnerability. The idea being that our life experiences tell us how much ready for a flight or a fight we need to be. And if we've had lots of things go wrong for us, we'll be more ready for a fight or a flight than other people. So the stress bucket idea is that our bucket might already be very full, and it only takes a little bit more water in that bucket to tip us over into being unable to manage our emotions. So if we haven't had adverse life experiences, generally we may be able to manage our emotions better than someone that has. Okay. So the more adverse experiences we've had, the less empathy and ability to reason, and a tendency to see people as a threat we may have. And we may have less attention and concentration and be more impulsive as a result. Okay, so another theory that thinks about emotional regulation. This comes from a theory called compassionate mind, and the idea is that we all have an emotion regulation system which contains three parts: a drive system which motivates us to do things. And the feelings involved in that are wanting, pursuing, achieving, progressing. We have a soothing system which helps us manage distress and promote bonding. We often feel contented, safe, protected, cared for in this place. But we also have a threat system, which is all about threat detection, protection, keeping ourselves safe, and this involves the amygdala. And our feelings in this state may be anxiety, anger, and disgust. So the idea is that people who've undergone psychological trauma as a child would more likely to be spending a lot of their time in this threat system. More time than other people. So they may find it difficult to know how to soothe themselves, calm themselves down, and they might also find it difficult to motivate themselves, drive themselves to do things in life that other people are able to do. Okay, there's another theory that helps us try and make sense of why people struggle with emotional regulation, which is called the wise mind. Sorry, I put emotional mind there. Let's just say wise mind there. So the idea is that we have two minds, a reasonable mind and an emotional mind. Our reasonable mind is factual, analytical, logical, objective, non-feeling. And our emotional mind is all about feelings. It wants immediate gratification. It's all about intensity of emotion. It's passion. It's got lots of passion. It's very reactive. So I think we'll all be able to think of examples of where we've been acting from this emotional place. I think people who've had traumatic experiences will be more likely to be operating from this place more of the time. And the aim is to be more in the middle, so we can think about our emotions and what our emotional mind is telling us, but also think about what our reasonable mind is telling us, and come to a balanced approach. I think people who've experienced trauma will find it very hard to be in this middle place. Okay, this theory is used in dialectical behaviour therapy as a way to help people move to this middle place. Okay, so there are a range of ways that people get through and manage these emotional feelings. And I'm sure you will have seen lots of these. So people may regulate their overwhelming feelings through dissociation, which is basically cutting off from the feeling. Self-injury, use of alcohol and drugs to block feelings out. Deny that there's anything wrong, so being in denial. Project their distress onto other people, or splitting. So splitting's a dynamic where people can see the world as either good or bad and struggle to see any of the grey, so that they use splitting to help themselves cope with the fact that the world is an unsure, uncertain place, by making it a very clear place that there's either good people, bad people, good things, bad things. So they will have certain people that they like a lot and idolize, and they'll have certain people that they absolutely despise and denigrate. So these can be some of the ways that people use to regulate overwhelming feelings. Another thing people do to survive these feelings, to maintain a sense of control, they may restrict their eating, they might develop rituals, they may become violent, and they may become dominant in relationships. Okay. Some people may protect themselves from feeling hurt and abandoned by rejecting others before they reject them. So having this constant state of distrust, and a way to cope with that distrust, rejecting other people first before they get rejected themselves. Seeking care, trying to get care in unusual ways. Promiscuous behaviour, so ending up with lots of short-term relationships as a way to feel cared for. Submission, so doing anything someone wants them to do, so at least they're loved by someone. And ending up in violence in relationships, so trying to stop people from leaving them. And people may engage in self-soothing behaviour like rocking, self-harm, alcohol use and overeating, I should say. So I'm sure lots of people have seen these sorts of survival strategies, and these are the things people are using to cope with those intolerable emotions that they have no other way of dealing with. Okay, so I've just put together the case example we discussed at the beginning, if you can remember that one, the lady who lived in supported living. So this is a very simple formulation of might be what's going on for her. She's had some insecure attachments as a child. Her primary emotional state that she can't regulate may be feeling rejected. So she engages in a range of strategies to try and help herself feel better. One of them is seeking care from anyone who will provide it. So these risky individuals that she engages with. But those people then take advantage of her, which actually leave her feeling even more rejected. She also tries to turn away her carers, so that before they reject her. So to try and protect herself from feeling rejected, she turns away the people that might actually be able to help her. And then she fails to develop a healthy attachment, which leads her to feeling rejected. So these coping strategies become problematic because they're reinforcing the problem rather than resolving it. She also self-harms, so she can go to hospital, so she can get some care from the doctors and nurses there. But as soon as she gets there, they just discharge her home because they realise that there isn't a life or death emergency, and hospital isn't the place for her. So then she goes into feeling rejected again. So that's an example of how we can put together in a very simple way all of those things I've just talked about into a kind of formulation, which is what we do as psychologists, to try and make sense of what this lady's doing and why she's doing it. Okay, so that brings us now on to personality disorder. So people with these sorts of needs sometimes get diagnosed as personality disorder when they become persistent, pervasive, and problematic. Okay, but it's helpful to recognize that there is a continuum between personality disorder and normal personality. That people can sit in the middle of this continuum, not have a personality disorder, but they clearly do have emotional difficulties and emotional needs. So whilst there are sometimes benefits to giving someone a diagnosis of personality disorder, it is often more helpful to think of them as having complex emotional needs and working with the individual to come together with a formulation of why they're acting in the way they are based on their history, because the label of personality disorder doesn't really tell us anything. So if someone has a borderline personality disorder, it doesn't really tell us anything about why they're behaving the way they are. So it's always important to have both the diagnosis and a bit of narrative about how their early life experiences might explain how they're acting today. Okay. The other thing we need to recognize is, as practitioners, when we work with people who have these sort of needs, as I've discussed, there's a lot of high expressed emotion, and it does lead to everyone, however many years qualified we've been, however many of these people we've worked with, we end up sometimes being embroiled in an emotional reaction to how they are behaving. So we can sometimes feel very guilty that we're not offering enough. I think that's very, very common. We can become very anxious about the outcome of the risky behaviour. We can become very frustrated that the person doesn't seem to be getting any better. We can become very hopeless about that as well, and also quite confused of why they keep behaving in ways that are self-perpetuating. And we can also feel angry and resentful that service users can feel ungrateful. So these are all very normal emotions when working with people that present with such complex needs. And I think the key for us is to recognize these feelings if we're having them, and to reflect on them, to make sure that it's not getting in the way of the decisions we're making and the assessments we're doing. Because it's very easy to, for example, become so anxious about someone's risky behavior that we start to assess their capacity in a very risk orientated way. So I'll come to this a bit more later, but this is key really, and I spend a lot of my time working with systems and teams around people with personality difficulties to help them with these sorts of emotions. So I've got a model that can help us think about this really. This is called the boundary seesaw model. And don't worry too much about all of these words on here, but the idea is that we can be pulled when working with people with complex needs to either becoming very, very over-involved and very, very placating, which can move into being exploitative. But we can also become very, very controlling of individuals as well. So there's this seesaw model that helps us think, if we're moving as a team or as an individual to either of these sides, we need to try and stay in this middle place. Okay, and I use this with the teams a lot to help them think about, are we becoming a little bit controlling here with this individual, or are we becoming a little bit over involved or pacifying this individual? So trying to be that negotiator in the middle, having fixed and flexible limits. And I think this model is useful to look at sometimes when you see two teams acting in ways that are polar opposite to one another. So I've certainly come across teams where one team believes that the person doesn't have a problem, there's nothing wrong with them, and they should be discharged from hospital or don't need community care. And then the other team is saying they need a much higher level of security or really, really intensive support. So I would explain that sort of reaction using this model, that the team has been pulled to either side of this model by the person's emotional needs. Okay, so that was a bit of a tour through what can lead people to end up presenting in the way like the case study at the beginning. That all of the ways that the early relationships can impact on how someone then grows up as an adult, and the kind of emotions they may struggle with day to day, and what they may do to then cope with those emotions. So assessing mental capacity in individuals with these sorts of difficulties is incredibly challenging. So what I'm going to go through some things that I think might be helpful that I've been grappling with over the years. The first thing I'm going to think about is considering these organizational dynamics a little bit more. Consider the guiding principle of unwise decisions and how that's relevant here. Consider the guiding principle of supporting decision making and how that's relevant here. This idea of fluctuating capacity, consider how that's relevant to personality disorder, and also look at the concept of executive functioning and how that's relevant. Okay, so the reason I've put this in is because individual practitioners and organisations can very easily, unconsciously, they're not meaning to, act out P's internal mental state by becoming split on issues of capacity. So it's really important that steps are taken in the initial stage to avoid these splits, including staff training, reflective spaces to discuss complex cases, and clinical supervision. So I think when litigation, when it becomes a court issue capacity, these splits can then become even worse because each team can then start to believe that they have to prove that they are right. So I think this needs to happen before any court is involved, when it's at the assessment stage within your teams. So to recognise splits, it would be looking for if different practitioners have very different views. So some practitioners thinking he definitely has capacity, and then another practitioner thinking he absolutely doesn't have capacity. So that's one way of recognising a split, and looking at how empathetic people are able to remain around the individual is another way of thinking about it. This can happen also at an organisational level. So I've had this happen many times where the NHS, for example, can believe an NHS team can believe an individual has capacity, and social care believes someone doesn't, or the other way around. And that's very difficult to manage, and I think that's where you start needing some sort of independent mediation. But if it's happening within your own team, it's about having some space to discuss those feelings together as a team and really hear from the people that have those differing views, just to thrash out what's going on and recognize if there may be an emotional aspect to what's going on. Okay, so the ability to make unwise decisions. So we all know that this is a guiding principle of the Mental Capacity Act. And I think in personality disorder and emotional difficulties, this can be very difficult to tease apart. And I think a psychological understanding like the one I've just gone through can help you do that. Because if the decision that someone's making is related to a survival strategy, so a coping strategy that they're using, and they can't use and weigh the risks and benefits of using that survival strategy, like in the case example I gave, if they couldn't see how it may be making things worse over time, as well as the benefits of immediately feeling okay, that may be a way to look at whether it's an incapacitous decision, rather than unwise if the decision isn't related at all to one of those survival strategies. So it's a way of thinking, is the decision related to the disorder in the mind, the impairment in the mind, the emotional dysregulation? So these survival strategies are very clearly related to the impairment in the mind, because it's a way of coping with the emotions. So if you're assessing capacity around one of those survival strategies that someone's using, it's about properly assessing if they understand that coping strategy that they're using, whether they understand the benefits of it, the costs of it, using the other section of the Mental Capacity Act. Okay, another thing that I've had to grapple a lot with in this area is the guiding principle of supporting decision making. So again, that psychological understanding we talked about earlier can help us think about whether there are actually any strategies in someone's care that might reduce their emotional dysregulation so that they can get to a point where they can make decisions differently. And I think this doesn't have to necessarily be complex. So for example, in the case example I gave of the person feeling rejected, it might be about working out how to use that support worker that comes into her home slightly differently so that they meet some of her underlying emotional needs to feel cared for and wanted and needed, instead of coming in just to provide more practical tasks. And that might be enough to reduce the emotional dysregulation for someone to then be able to make informed decisions. So I think this is quite useful to think about what can be done to improve capacity. There is often a lot of scope to improve capacity in people who've got these sorts of needs. Okay, another thing that this has been talked about in other forums, this idea that some people might fluctuate in their capacity to make decisions. And I think, were you going to say something, Michael? Or no? Okay. So So fluctuating mental capacity is when someone may be able to make capacity at one point in time, but not at another point in time. And there's been some thoughts in the literature already about how you might think about fluctuating capacity. And these three areas have been suggested, that you have to think about whether it fluctuates temporarily, whether it fluctuates on a predictable basis, or whether it fluctuates unpredictably. And I think, but we need to also be clear about whether the capacity is fluctuating or whether the capacity isn't there all of the time as well. And that's when we come on to my next slide about executive functioning. So people have talked about executive functioning in brain injury, but it's also very relevant in personality disorder. So 39 Essex Street Chambers, in their mental capacity guide, they talk about this idea that if someone has problems with executive functioning, they may have problems with using and weighing the fact that they don't do what they say or need to do in practice when they need to. And this can also be relevant to some people with personality disorder, where they can't see the link between what they say they're going to do and what they don't do in practice. And there's lots of literature about people with personality disorder and complex emotional needs having difficulties with executive functioning. That is, being able to inhibit responses, monitor their own behaviour, initiate responses when they need to, plan, organise their responses. So this is something that is relevant, but it clearly needs a specialist to consider. And there are different assessments that can be done to assess someone's executive functioning that psychology can often help with. But sometimes I've found that people aren't able, so whilst it might appear their capacity is fluctuating, when you assess them at this level, they can't actually link between what they say they're going to do and what they know they need to do and what they actually do. So it's important to consider, when fluctuating capacity is a consideration, that this is also a consideration about whether there could be issues with executive functioning. Okay, so I've got some take-home messages. So people with complex emotional needs are surviving in ways which are the only ways they know how. And the diagnosis of personality disorder on its own, without a psychological formulation, has limitations in being able to support someone fully. So working with people with complex emotional needs results in high levels of emotional stress, and we can all end up acting out the person's internal state, and we need to stop and reflect to stop that happening. And mental capacity assessments in people with complex emotional needs requires a specialist assessment that links that psychological understanding of why someone's doing what they're doing with the decision that's being questioned. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. So I'm now opening the floor to questions.
Thanks very much, Dr. Todd. Can you hear me? Because I'm having immense technical problems at my end.
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, hopefully in that case, everybody else can hear me. I'm disadvantaged because I haven't seen many questions, just the few before I was cut off. And I also haven't heard quite a lot of the presentation, unfortunately. So I'll have to watch it later on the recording. And I hope I'm not answering a question you've already covered, really. But I was just interested in what you were saying towards the end there, Dr. Todd, about how we often see, as lawyers and no doubt other practitioners, we often see this reference, as you say, to executive functioning and its importance in brain injury. And it's really helpful and useful to see it referred to in this context as well. And am I right in saying that there's more and more research which is establishing that adverse traumatic experiences in childhood actually lead to essentially an injury to the brain, which can actually be seen on some measures of these things? Is that right? So it can actually cause a brain injury, that sort of traumatic experience.
Yes, very much so. And I did contemplate putting some of that research in this presentation. There's some really interesting studies of children in orphanages in particular, where they showed that the brain was fundamentally different between children that have had a healthy upbringing. So this stuff isn't just kind of fluffy, kind of it's good to have. It's absolutely essential that people have these stable early relationships for them to develop into not only emotionally adjusted individuals, but in terms of their neurological development as well. Because that's another bit I was thinking of putting in about this threat response that I was talking about. The amygdala, which is related to the threat response, there's some research about that developing differently in people who've had traumatic childhood experiences as well. So that's why they're more likely to be in this threat mode a lot of the time.
Thanks very much. We've had a thank you, Dr. Todd, from somebody attending, and a question about could you suggest any easily accessible article or chapter which develops what you were telling us about the boundary seesaw model, so that they can use it to support colleagues?
Yes, I can. Yeah, there is actually a chapter that discusses that model in more detail, and I can give the reference to that with my presentation when I put it online.
Thank you. We'll put that on there then. Another question is whether you could talk about people as being assessed as lacking capacity because of alcohol and drug misuse, when in fact they may have been doing so for many years. What, in your experience, tips the balance here?
Okay. So if it's I might need some more details about that question. Is the person saying
tricky one, really?
Is the person saying that the individual has only got alcohol and drug misuse as their only difficulty?
I think that for the sake of argument, if we take it that that's the thrust of the question.
Okay, because I think if there was suggestion that they were using the drugs and alcohol as a coping strategy, as one of these survival strategies for some adverse experiences, we would have to consider it differently, I think. So that's where I would start. I'd want a bit more I'd be assessing the function of the alcohol use.
Thanks, Dr. Todd. And sorry, go on.
Yes, I was just saying I would assess that first before going any further, really, with that.
Thank you. One question is about if P is using silence to manipulate and attention seek and isn't responding to questions in relation to the decision that has to be made. How does a practitioner engage in the assessment of their executive functioning ability? And they're saying, you know, for example, in a self-neglect or a hoarding case.
Okay, I think that's very, very difficult. You would be reliant a lot on the history and what you know from what they're actually doing in practice. But if they're using silence in the assessment, when you're trying to assess that, I think there is some guidance on that in the 39 Essex Street's capacity guidelines about how you can address a kind of refusal to engage in an assessment. I think there's some useful pointers in there. I think I'd point you to.
Thank you. And a broad question about whether you've had experience of working with people who have a learning disability diagnosis, but have also been given a personality diagnosis. And I suppose it follows from that. Any comments or thoughts about that combination of diagnoses?
Yeah, that's actually my specialist field is learning disabilities, so I encounter that quite a lot. I think there's something that needs to be considered, which is people with learning disabilities may have had different sorts of trauma, so it's kind of thinking about that, and what that could then mean for the individual. And also that their cognitive functioning may mean that they respond differently to these extreme emotional reactions. So it might not always seem as straightforward as why someone's doing something, because they may not be responding in the same way someone else might. So I think it just needs a little bit more thinking about based on their individual history.
Thank you. And Peter Edwards here asking about the difficulties for judges in the Court of Protection, because you vividly set out, you know, the disputes that can arise, and just how difficult it is to assess somebody's capacity in this sort of context. And do you have any thoughts about how difficult it must be for judges who ultimately have to make the decision, don't they, based on perhaps the expertise, the independent expert reports and so on they have before them. It's clearly a really, really difficult task in these cases, isn't it?
Yes, and I don't envy judges in some of these cases at all. I think the independent assessment can be useful in these cases when there is potentially some emotional dynamics that are going on between the parties, because the independence of the expert coming in may be able to see that happening, that some people are overly involved and other people who are not considering the issues in the way that they they maybe would do in other cases. So I think I've been in cases where I've definitely seen that. I remember one where it was a local authority and an NHS trust who were in complete disagreement, and some of my opinion in that case was around that there was an emotional dynamic that was causing this, and part of the recommendations were that the two trusts, the two groups of people sat down to explore some of that. So I think that there does need to be some questions about these emotional dynamics that can go on, and to at least check that people aren't embroiled maybe in a dynamic, so they're acting from an emotional place, especially the practitioners on the ground. But I think when it gets to litigation, it then becomes that those splits can become even worse. And I think that's the difficulty, that by the time it hits court, it's even harder to deal with.
Because I suppose that the parties are forced into taking positions ultimately, aren't they? They have to take a firm position.
Yes. So then they are then maybe intensifying the split even more when what some of these cases need is a middle ground. Look at all the facts. And I think that's what the judge has to try and do, isn't it? But then when the facts are being presented in ways that come across in a different way, it can be very challenging. So I think the only thing I can recommend is that independent expertise and the use of mediation as well prior to court, to try and deal with some of these issues at the lower level. So those would be my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Todd. One question about, I think it's about a scenario whereby perhaps somebody's in the care of a team, and the professionals that know this person well are of the view they lack capacity to make decisions in respect of a number of significant areas. But then if they self-harm and they present at hospital, and it may be quite serious self-harm, the A&E team and the team in the hospital take the view that they have capacity to make the full range of decisions, and they're discharged without receiving much in the way of treatment. I don't know if you have any comments on that question or response to that.
Yes, I think there's a history around people with personality disorders of it not being seen as the same sort of mental health disorder as another disorder. So someone with schizophrenia, for example, might be treated differently to someone with a personality disorder. With someone with a personality disorder, people having more of an assumption that there won't be an issue with capacity at all. So I know that assumption's meant to be there for everyone, but kind of not questioning the assumption at all, that they've got a personality disorder, so therefore they have capacity. That is the rule, that people with personality disorder always have capacity. So I think there's some people that do in practice that do believe that all people with personality disorder have capacity. But I think it's more nuanced, and it's about looking, as I have in this presentation, about why they might be doing that behaviour, and is it related to part of their personality which they haven't got any control over, then it becomes slightly different. So I've definitely seen the split between how the health service, NHS staff, especially in A&E, can see personality disorder to how social services might see it. Like social services can see it more of a problem, and people can get discharged very quickly with no intervention at all in A&E if they've got a diagnosis of a personality disorder. So I think there's some psychiatrists that don't believe it's a proper diagnosis as such. So there is a bit of a professional issue about whether it is actually a disorder, a personality disorder. So I think all of these things I'm just mentioning play a part in why it can get so split.
Thank you. And just drawing things to a close, a couple more questions, if that's okay, Dr. Todd. One from Susan Matenga. Dr. Todd mentioned a psychological assessment around executive functioning. How easy is it to request for an executive functioning assessment from a psychologist to help and support a mental capacity assessment?
So I think in these people, very complex individuals with personality disorder where capacity is under dispute, I think psychologists should be called on to give the expertise not only around the executive functioning but around the psychological formulation about why they might be doing what they're doing and what that might mean, so that those issues around unwise decisions and how their decision making can be supported can all be properly teased apart. So I think there is the role for psychology in these assessments, and I've certainly, when I have worked in community teams, have supported social services to do complex assessments. So I've provided them with some advice and some assessments. So I do know it's possible to make those referrals and to ask for that assistance, because these are these cases where I think there is the need for the greater kind of medical expertise around the diagnosis and how that links to the functional questions, especially when there's a dispute about the capacity.
Thanks, Dr. Todd. I think really a final question, a couple of similar questions have come in really. Just a final question about if there are concerns around P's executive functioning, where they are saying one thing during an assessment but acting differently when presented with real life situations, how can we assess their capacity to fully capture their understanding in relation to decisions and to manage the risks?
Yeah, so I think there'd be, in this scenario, there'd be a big part of the assessment would be putting to them all of the things that people have said they've done, and asking them what they would do next time. But then trying to show them the inconsistency there may be, that you've said that you're not going to do it again, but actually it's happened again. So what do you think that's about? So trying to find out what they make of the inconsistency, to see if they can understand the inconsistency and use and weigh all the issues around the inconsistency. Because if they're able to justify why they haven't acted in the way they say they're going to act. And it's different, isn't it, than if they don't really have any insights into the emotional dynamics that may have made them act in a way that they didn't want to act, or they didn't choose to act. So I think it's just putting all of the evidence to the person and having a very open discussion about it. That's how I usually do these assessments.
Yes, I think that's really, I very much agree with that. And if there are a number of these, really concrete examples, it really helps to have that discussion, doesn't it? Over a period of, say, 6 months, if there are 5 or 6 really clear examples like that, as you say, if you can put those to the person and they can recall them happening, their account is then incredibly helpful, isn't it, in understanding what they say about that.
Yes, and I've certainly had it where the person isn't able to fully understand why they didn't do what they said they were going to do, and were quite distressed by the fact that they weren't able to do what they wanted to do. And I've had the opposite, where the person knows they've not acted in the way they wanted to, but is able to give kind of a justification of why that was as well. And then we start getting into the territory of the unwise type decisions. So I think it's an incredibly complex issue.
Yeah. Well, you've really assisted us with that incredibly complex issue this afternoon, Dr. Todd. Thank you very much indeed. I know a lot of people thanking you for the presentation as part of their questions or separately. And thank you everybody for attending. As you know, the presentation is being recorded and will be placed on our website. And so you can access it that way. And that brings this series of webinars to an end, but we very much hope to have more in the future. So thank you again, Dr. Todd, and thank you everybody for attending. Bye.
Thank you.